Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
The National Weather Service.
And a good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is the 15th of November, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. No matter what part of Alaska you're watching from tonight, we have several different ways for you to stay up to date and stay safe with the weather knowledge that we have to share with you there at 1-800-472-0391. That'll get you your local Alaska weather information line forecast there. It's open 24/7. The weather.gov/Alaska is a statewide view, but if you'd like to localize your web experience, go to weather.gov/Fairbanks, weather.gov/Juneau, or weather.gov/Anchorage, as you well know. And you can email us your weather questions, your weather pictures, as you'll see here in just a minute. Or if you've just got a question about how to use the website, let us know, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Here's a look at our weather show times. As always, the ARCS system there is still live at 5:30. Same for KUAC 9.4. Hello to everyone watching out of the Middle Tanana Valley tonight. Live on UAF TV at 360 North is 7 days a week, and 7:30 p.m. is where you'll find us there on that system. Alaska Public Media in the morning, 5 o'clock now. And of course, you can find us on YouTube. If you like to scrub ahead and just watch the marine section or the aviation section, you can do that. AKwx TV is how you search for that in Google or on YouTube. You'll find it fairly quickly there. Or just head on over to the weather.gov/Alaska weather site and look for the TV section. You'll find it linked up in that area as well. This is what the upper Yukon looked like over the last several days. More and more ice has been showing up there, says Ann in Eagle. Thank you so much for sharing your picture with us, Ann. And as always, if you have a picture of your part of Alaska, we'd love to see what it looks like, some of the winter changes that you're seeing there, whether it's snow or no snow or just a curious critter walking through. I'd love to see what it looks like where you are in your part of Alaska, and I'm sure it's beautiful any way you slice it. Here's a look at the Yukon River again earlier this week as the ice is starting to collect and form there in the upper part of the river there. As we look at hazardous weather a little bit further out, it has been cold enough for parts of the Chukchi Coast as well as the Bering Strait for snow to fall. That has not been true for all parts of the interior, but slowly and surely winter is forming there, and had a little bit of snow around the Fairbanks region the last day or so. And now we turn our attention to the chance for accumulating snow for areas north of Kivalina and along the Bering Strait coast all the way down to St. Lawrence Island, where up to 2 inches of snow is possible. A winter weather advisory is in effect and will continue until noon tomorrow. The other part of that is poor visibility. So not just that snow is falling, but winds may be blustery and gusts up to 40 to 45 miles per hour from the south. So that'll be from St. Lawrence Island all the way through the Bering Strait and then generally north of Kivalina all the way up toward Point Hope. That's in effect right now and will continue until noon tomorrow. So travel might be a little more tricky than normal as a result of that snow and poor visibility. So do be careful and plan ahead for that and make sure you know where your folks are going and when they get there, of course. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and low pressure is still a focus there across the central and eastern Gulf, but you can see it's kind of spreading and stretching out across the eastern Gulf, so it's not as focused on southeast or as focused as it was around Haida Gwaii or Vancouver Island, but it is stretching some more bands of clouds northward. Yesterday we saw thunder and lightning out of that. Some of that was moving into the Copper River Basin, and now a lot of that has become a lot more diffuse. So let's turn our attention to where the active weather is, and you can see a lot of cloud cover here across the North Pacific. There is a very powerful cyclone just out of view of our satellite picture here, and it is going to stay south and then gradually work its way over across the eastern Gulf. Over the rest of the week, it will gradually weaken and move eastward and really not affect a whole lot of folks in the Gulf of Alaska unless you've got a friend passing through in a ship across the central Gulf. They might get some higher than normal seas there, but the big stuff is way south of the Aleutians. It looks like a beauty on a bigger satellite picture. A little bit further northward, though, another wave of low pressure is stretching colder air all the way across the western Bering, and this is moving eastward. You can kind of see the progression of the clouds there. High pressure is trying to set up across the interior, and another wave of low pressure behind that will start to stir things up as we get into Thursday and Friday. So the weather's kind of on the move, but the really big trend right now is to see that colder air slowly, I like to say oozing. It really is just oozing southward, kind of creeping itself southward into the nooks and crannies of Alaska and settling in as high pressure is moving into the northern Yukon and the Northwest Territories there. And it's a pretty decent system, as you'll see here in the next couple days. That bubble of very cold and stable air is really going to set up in the interior exactly like we'd like to see for the middle of winter. Across the Arctic Ocean, you've got 1,014 millibar high across Point Barrow and just south and into the interior, 1,015 millibars. You can see that ridge working its way here across the west coast. Here's our diffuse, kind of chewed up weather system across the central and eastern Gulf at 994 millibars is its lowest point. And then we have whatever this is. This is kind of a so-so storm. It's whatever's left there, 1,002 millibars. Really not much to talk about at all. But it does have a southerly flow that's pushing moisture northward and across the Bering Strait, and enough so that snow is falling across some parts of St. Lawrence Island, around Tin City in Wales, and then northward toward the Chukchi Coast. That's today. As we get into tonight, the weather pattern itself doesn't really latch on to anything, but it still has enough moisture in that southerly moving wind and warmer and wetter air moving into a colder environment. Well, that's good for rain and snow and probably some mixed precipitation there from Norton Sound westward. So all of that combined, yeah, you might see a couple inches of snow if you're on St. Lawrence Island or western parts of Seward Peninsula and north of Kivalina all the way up the Chukchi Coast. Now there's a better chance you're going to see fog around AKwx and point southward there. Look at high pressure here building in really quickly, 1,027 millibars there. That should help to keep your sky generally clear, maybe some patchy areas of fog, but it looks like the wind's going to start to pick up a little bit more from north to south working down through Cook Inlet. Wouldn't be surprised to see a brief snow shower in there, a better chance for rain showers out over the Gulf, and you'll notice again, not a really tight pressure gradient here across southeast. Might have a little bit of a breeze, but it's not that big wind you had just a few days ago and last week. Now to the west, a sign of change there, a 979 millibar low, quickly moving eastward with a cold front that'll move into the western Aleutians as we get into Wednesday. Because of that, there could be some heavier rainfall out across some of the western chain. But the focus for those big winds and really the unsettled weather and the precipitation that goes along with it, especially the wintry precipitation, will still stay well to the west by midweek. There will be some bands of snow, it looks like, that pass through the central and eastern interior. Probably will decorate the upper Yukon River a little bit more than it had previously. We'll watch the winds start to pick up across the central and western chain as we get into Wednesday. And again, we're watching this really beautiful storm down across the open waters of the North Pacific, but this is not related to that. That system is well to the south and moving eastward and going to stay well away from most areas of land as we go through Wednesday and into Thursday. Here's Thursday, and you'll notice that front now is working its way through the Aleutians. You'll see a stronger southerly flow out ahead of that, and the winds will gradually switch around out across the central and western chain behind it at 976 millibars there, just off the coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula. That'll be the focus for the circulation. And then out across the northern Gulf, things are pretty dry. High pressure's in charge across the north and eastern sections of the interior and just south of AKwx at 1,037 millibars, close to Old Crow, in fact. And because of that, things will be pretty quiet across south central and southwest, but they will be cooler as we go through the remainder of the week, and especially for southeast. Anywhere in the interior, southern Alaska and southeastern Alaska, from say about today until Friday and Saturday, probably could see on the order of 10 to 20 degrees difference in temperature as we all cool down in those regions there. Out across the west, not the case. That's a southerly wind, and that means a warm up for you. Here's a look at temperatures today. 30s and 40s for many across southeast there. The capital city close to 40 degrees mid-afternoon. 44 in Sitka, lower 40s for Ketchikan and Annette. Annette got a decent amount of rainfall today, about a third of an inch or so. 48 was the afternoon high there. South Central in the 30s and 40s for many around the Kenai Peninsula. It couldn't break that 40-degree mark. 37 around Kodiak. It was 20 in Fairbanks, 18 in Eagle. And again, helping to make more river ice there as we saw. 18 around Fort Yukon, 19 for AKwx Pass. Single-digit territory there for Kaktovik, and even colder as you get out toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. Went sub-zero for many this morning. 13 around Barrow. Around the Chukchi Coast, teens and 20s for many. Kotzebue was showing 24, 21 in Nome, 19 for regions around Unalakleet, 18 in Galena, 32 in St. Lawrence Island and Gamble. It was 21 in McGrath, 23 out around Amonuk. And as you get toward Bethel, it was 19 degrees. Lake Iliamna saw temperatures in the mid to upper 20s there. Mid 30s for Kodiak Island, upper 30s around St. Paul, a little bit cooler for St. George. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula from Sandpoint out toward Dutch Harbor, where it warmed up a little bit more, close to 40 in Adak as well, and 41 in Shemya. Overnight low temperatures will stay in the single digits for many in the interior, perhaps even going below that around Healy. South Central tonight, mid to upper 20s, 31 around Kodiak, 20s and 30s for southeast, 20s and 30s for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay down in the teens. Looks like Bethel will be looking at about 10 degrees or so tonight, 15 for Unalakleet, 19 in Nome, and 14 in Barrow with a high there tomorrow of 23. Fairbanks, you're looking at 15 or so, mid to upper 20s for South Central and the Cook Inlet region, 40 degrees for Kodiak, 30s and 40s for southeast. And it looks like mid to upper 30s, even 40 degrees for many across the Alaska Peninsula out toward Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Bristol Bay temps in the mid-20s with Nunivak Island at 38, Nome 35, and again the Chukchi Coast and Barrow in the teens and 20s tomorrow. Flying weather shows a wide area of IFR across the Brooks Range and in the interior tomorrow. Watch for IFR around Nome to start and into parts of the south and west in the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta. By the afternoon, that won't change a whole lot. Look for that to affect regions around Norton Sound and also across the eastern Brooks Range all the way up to the North Slope, possibly Prudhoe Bay, Deadhorse, and out toward Wainwright and Barrow, as well as the Kotzebue Sound region and the eastern 40-mile country, as well as the eastern Alaska Range itself. Southeast looks to be in the clear. And AKwx Pass, IFR to start with a switch over toward MVFR during the day. Again, expecting similar conditions there for Adigan Pass as we go. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as well as Rainy Pass, look to be VFR through most of your Wednesday. Windy Pass probably starts that way, but a gradual shift to MVFR should be expected there. And for Isabel Pass on your Wednesday. Mentasta Pass, we expect a morning start at VFR, so get moving early. MVFR could set in through the afternoon. Expecting similar conditions in Tanita Pass. Portage Pass right now looks to be okay. VFR conditions there for your Wednesday, and Chilkoot and White Pass, as we saw, look to be A-okay as well. Freezing levels indicate cold air is winning this week anyway, looking like it's pouring out over southwestern Alaska, and with that the surface freezing lines taking a dive southward, but the response to those southerly winds jogging it northward toward the Bering Strait, and here comes the warmer weather aloft as well out in the west. Levels there rising up to 6,000 feet at the 2,000-foot freezing level over southeastern Alaska tomorrow morning. Icing potential will certainly increase across the western coastline there, light to isolated moderate, generally above 5,000 feet through the Bering Strait, and then above 2,000 feet for parts of the interior, maybe below that in the morning, and then above 6,000 feet for areas just offshore of southeastern Alaska. So keeping a watch on that would be good out in the west. The jet stream has an active region of weather moving into the western Bering, but across regions to our south, the main corridor of really active weather is well south of Alaska. And underneath this system here is where we're finding that really potent ocean storm right now. Again, that is not expected to affect Alaska with any winds or seas at this point. As we look at 9,000 feet, here's a broad area of southerlies working across the western Bering, 50 to as high as 60, 65 knots or so. Again, coming from the south, a ridge of high pressure extends out of the North Pacific, and that's helping to channel those southerlies in through the Bering Sea and into the Chukchi Sea, actually. Northerlies coming down the western coast, 20 to about 30 knots or so, and then a weaker area of low pressure across the south central area with northerlies coming through the Susitna Valley and light winds wrapping around low pressure for southeastern Alaska. At 3,000 feet, the pattern looks very similar, but the wind speeds are a little different here. We have broad northerlies working through the interior at about 15 to 20 knots. Light north and northeasterly winds across the central and northern sections of the Panhandle. Winds are light, generally blowing offshore. And then our winds really pick up across the central and western chain as high as 70 knots from the south on the western side of that high pressure system. So of course we'll be watching for turbulence in the western part of the chain below 4,000 feet. Also for some bumps around Kodiak Island, Lake Iliamna, and westward toward Bristol Bay, especially King Salmon, and then a broader area of light to isolated moderate chop working its way up across the western side of the Alaska Range and northward to about Galena or so, and through the Bering Strait below 4,000 feet. Southeast looks pretty quiet, as does most of the central and eastern interior and the north slope. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
And we love to hear about all the fascinating developments, new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I've got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros, back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Yeah. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread. Right. The satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail. And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt. Sure. So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing. Okay. That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other. And they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
That sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Well, let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo.
Oh,
so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture, and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there.
Right.
I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels. Okay. And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then. Sure. And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going erupting. Off. Yep. Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths. Okay. But it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the spectrum there. Okay. So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really, and the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the north slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. It's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now, you got to choose the right tool for the job. Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, like this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. And I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellites, the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing, and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time. Here's a look at today's sea ice analysis, and as you'll see with those southerly winds, there's probably a little chance that we're going to see any ice growth here around the Chukchi Sea, around the Bering Strait, or certainly south of it at this point, with warmer air working north and the winds staying up. However, there's been a lot of changes here in the Beaufort Sea as that continues to fill in. Temperatures are cold, the water's cold. It's really good conditions for more ice formation there, and if you're looking very carefully, you can see ice is formed along the coast, inside of Kotzebue Sound, along the western side of the Seward Peninsula, inside of Norton Sound, and all the way along the YK Delta. There's even been a little bit of slush there across the Bristol Bay region, and it won't take very long in conditions like this, especially as they grow colder, to start seeing ice inside of the Cook Inlet there. So watch for some changes there. You can always track them, concentration, the forecast, and the movement of that. Weather.gov/Anchorage/ice anytime you want. Here's a look at the weather in southeast. Northerlies draining through the interior waters there at 25 knots or so. 5-foot seas expected for many on the inside. Across the outer coast, winds are actually a little bit lower. 15 to 20 knots there in most cases. A north and northeasterly wind, and 9 to 11-foot seas expected with smaller seas the further north you go. For Thursday, a little bit more of an offshore change with easterlies at 10 to 15 knots in the south, 20 knots in the north, and you're still looking at about 5-foot seas along the outer coast, 20 to 25 on the inside, 3-foot seas inside of Clarence Strait, 5-foot seas up around the Lynn Canal at 25 knots with that northerly flow. For south central, light winds inside of Prince William Sound, 15 knots on the outside as well. 3-foot seas inside of Prince William Sound and northern Cook Inlet, 6 to 8-foot seas as you work down from Callaghan Island down toward the Barrens with 20 to 25 knots there. A west and northwesterly wind coming out through the Barrens, and northerlies across the western Gulf, 15 to about 30 knots there. For Thursday, look for a little bit more of a northeasterly flow inside of Cook Inlet, 15 to 20, 20 to 25 west of the Callaghan Islands all the way down, or west of the Barrens all the way into Shelikof Strait with 3 to 6-foot seas in that region. North and northeasterlies around Prince William Sound, smaller seas inside, of course, and 25 knots around the western Gulf, looking for 3 to as high as 7-foot seas east of Kodiak Island. Inside of Bristol Bay, 25 knots from the north and east, 5-foot seas expected for Wednesday, and you'll see similar conditions down the Bering Sea coast. As you get into the North Pacific, 15 to 25 expected from the north with 6 to 7-foot seas there on Wednesday. That'll become easterly, feeding into the next wave of low pressure out in the Bering. Southeasterly flow across the Bering Sea coast, 5-foot seas and 25 knots, and easterlies inside of Bristol Bay, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Castle Cape to Chignik looking at 15 knots with a 7-foot sea. And for the central and eastern chain, winds will be considerably different than what you'll see in the west. A stronger southerly flow there, 45 to 55 knots, and storm force winds with higher gusts, 17 to 25 knots on Wednesday. East and southerly flow for the eastern and central chain, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots there on Wednesday. For Thursday, you can see the changing winds as the front sweeps across, looking for a south and westerly flow to diminish across the western chain. 40 knots coming up for Adak and Atka, 13 to 16-foot seas and higher gusts, and stronger southerlies developing for the eastern chain, 25 to 35, with 8 to as high as 13-foot seas there on Thursday. For the west coast, southerlies continue across the YK Delta, the Kuskokwim Bay region, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, southwesterlies around St. Matthew at 30 knots with a 13-foot sea, and 12-foot seas around St. Lawrence Island with 9-foot seas for St. Paul and St. George. Those winds come up a little bit more as we get into Thursday, anywhere from 30 to 40 knots with the strongest around St. Matthew and points north. Southeasterlies for St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, and into the Kuskokwim Bay region at 30 knots with a 7-foot sea. 30 knots on a south flow with 14-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George for Thursday. And for the north slope, look for westerlies about 10 to 15 over ice now for the Beaufort Seacoast. 3-foot seas north of Point Barrow, 10-foot seas as you get down toward Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, with southeasterlies strong enough to bring up the threat for heavy freezing spray in some cases. Winds remain a little bit light but start to blow more offshore across the Beaufort Seacoast for Thursday. And you'll see they're hanging around 25 to 30 knots across the Chukchi coast with seas as high as 8 to 10 feet on Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, a winter weather advisory is posted for St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, as well as the Chukchi coast north of Kivalina, expecting the possibility of up to 2 inches of snow, but on top of that, poor visibility that could go below 1/2 mile, making travel a little more tricky at this point. So be careful out there and be extra safe as you go in through the daytime, the morning tomorrow, till about noon when conditions should start to improve. Showers will continue across the central and eastern Gulf, and light snow is possible across some parts of the northern range as well as the central interior, but high pressure is moving in and cold air is moving south for many of us in central, southern, and southeastern Alaska, with warm air moving up the coast. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.